Okay, it's time for Cheap Heat. You'll never guess who this is. It's Vangelis. This is from a record that you can have for maybe 10 bucks. Maybe less. Maybe slightly more, but it's worth it, trust me. This is called The Dragon, and it was released without his permission in 1978. It's recordings from 1971 with a really cool band, Brian Odgers on bass, Mick Waller on drums, Michel Ripochet on violin, Urus on guitar. Urus was also in Vangelis' band at the time called Aphrodite's Child, and of course Vangelis on keyboards. Anyway, great record, all instrumental, kind of progressive psychedelic rock. I love it. I'm sorry he didn't. Another record he recorded right around the same time is called Hypothesis, and it's Vangelis' jazz record. He actually does a really good job. Some people call it free jazz. It's not really a free jazz record. It's definitely grooving all the way through. Tony Oxley on drums, Brian Odger on bass, also on The Dragon, and Michel Ripochet, also from The Dragon, on violin, and of course Vangelis on all manner of keyboards, clavinet, Fender piano, organs. I don't think there's much synthesizer on this, if any. Lots of acoustic piano though. This is a great record. The man can play. He also did a record after Aphrodite's Child broke up with some of the members, and this is called Earth. It's also a very unusual Vangelis record. I always associate him with synthesizer music. I don't have any of his synthesizer records. I think this stuff's the bomb though. This is called Earth, and it came out on Vertigo in 1973, and it's basically him and a couple other guys from Aphrodite's Child. There's no drummer on it, but there are some drums. It's sort of ritualistic progressive folk rock. I don't know what else to call it. There's some narration on it. It's about half instrumental, but it's really a great record. Chris Cole told me to get this one, and I did, and I don't regret it. And all these records are in numerous pressings, so if you don't find one pressing for cheap, or the pressings that I showed for cheap, just keep looking. Another really interesting musician who kind of disappeared, I don't know what happened to this guy, was the French guitarist and songwriter Alain Renaud. And he did these two records like back to back. Came out on a tiny French label called Urus Records, and some really cool stuff came out on Urus Records. Interestingly, Urus Records, also at its sister label Disjuncta Records, was the home of Helen early on, and all of the early Helen stuff is on those labels. And Richard Pinhas, he is not credited on the back cover of either one of these records, but he is credited on the label as assisting, and his fingerprints are all over these records stylistically. It's a real mixed bag of styles, some acoustic solo guitar, some freaky synthesizer instrumentals, some jazz rock type stuff, some psychedelic rock type stuff. They're really cool records though. Alain Renaud, they could be had for 10 bucks. I think for a while they were going for a little more because they're psychedelic rock kind of, but there's so many of them out there that I think you can get them for cheap. I'm gonna bet you can get those Alain Renaud records for cheap. They're really good. Another band, like Vangelis, it's probably better known for their later output. This was their first record, I believe. It's the Canadian band FM. It's basically a trio, violin, keyboards, and drums, and they all double on other instruments. Anyway, they did this record, and it was produced, I think, and distributed by Diskwasher. The Diskwasher people made these Diskwasher brushes. I've got these in every room of the house. They were kind of a prestige item when I was in college. I got the big bottle of D4. This is actually D4. A friend of mine gave it to me. Gigantic, industrial sized bottle of it. I use it. It's good stuff. Anyway, Diskwasher had quite the little empire going there, and they did this record and a few others, I believe. This is unlike a lot of other FM's stuff, FM the group. This is almost all instrumental. It's really great though. They were a great band actually, much more popular in their native Canada than in the US. And this is their first record. It's definitely sort of a jazz rock record. Lots of crazy keyboards on it, lots of really cool violin. The drummer's excellent. Can't say enough good things about this. This is another record, because it was kind of sketchy. There's numerous different versions of this coasting around out there. They all have more or less the same cover though. Anyway, Headroom by FM. Somewhat less sketchy is this record. It's a total classic. I feel remiss in not having talked about it sooner. Quiet Sun, sort of an all-star progressive rock, art rock band. Phil Manzanera from Roxy Music on guitar. Bill McCormick from Matching Mole and Manzanera's 801 band on bass. Charles Hayward from the Camberwell Now and This Heat on drums. And a keyboard player who's wonderful named Dave Jarrett, who I don't know what he did after this. But evidently they were a band in the early 70s and never recorded, but they had all this material, and it's pretty complicated material. I'd say it's complicated Canterbury-esque jazz rock prog type stuff, all instrumental. Eno's on this as well. Anyway, when Roxy hit it big and Matching Mole, I guess, were doing okay before Robert Wyatt had this accident. They got back together and decided to do a record, and this is it, and it is fantastic. Can't recommend that one highly enough. Mainstream by Quiet Sun. And again, if I go too fast, it's because I got a lot of stuff to talk about, and I list everything down below where I'm talking. So go look at it, because I list all the records there. Anyway, I mentioned 801. They did a cheap record. They did other records that are cheap, and all of them are great. This is my favorite one though. Phil Manzanera, Bill McCormick, Francis Monkman, who was in a great band called Curved Air. I'm going to talk about them momentarily. Simon Phillips, a great drummer, and Lloyd Watson, a slide guitarist and singer. Eno is also on this. They do a couple of the tracks from the Quiet Sun record. They do some Eno stuff. They do some Phil Manzanera stuff that appeared on his prior solo record called Diamond Head, which is actually really cool. This is a great record that Simon Phillips, for me, just makes this record. His drumming is so dynamic. Okay, another British band that people seem to have forgotten about is Backdoor. Backdoor did a record on their own, no label. Couldn't find a label for it. Self-produced, private issue. It's now an incredible collector's item, but it got picked up. It was so popular, it won awards, blah, 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 blah. Warner Brothers picks them up and reissues it in this format. Nice gatefold jacket, talking about the band's history. Anyway, it's an unusual band in that it's three guys, saxophone, bass, and drums. They do a unique mixture of music that I have never heard anyone else try. Sort of blues rock, kind of like, imagine the Groundhogs of the saxophone player and no guitar. Great vocalist, the bassist Colin Hodgkinson sings. And then they do these quirky, short jazz instrumentals that are kind of Ornette Coleman influenced. And then they just do some weird rock stuff too, that may or may not have vocals. Colin Hodgkinson is a wonderful bassist, kind of strums the bass. Later on joined Jan Hammer's band. He's been in a bunch of other bands too. Ron Asbury on saxophones and keyboards, and Tony Hicks on drums. Anyway, this is a really fascinating group. First record, really interesting, really quirky. Second record, a little bit more blues oriented. It's called 8th Street Nights. It's the first one I got, actually. My friend Manuel Franco said, "Dave, you got to get this." We were looking through records when I was a kid. "Dave, you got to get this record. It's really cool." So I did, and he was right. And then they kind of did a jazz rock record. They did two, actually, two more. This is called Another Fine Mess, and they have kind of a fuller sound on this because they added a keyboard player, Dave McRae from Matching Mole, on several tracks, Bernie Holland on guitar from Hummingbird, and Jody Grind on several tracks. This is kind of their first kind of jazz rock record. The blues thing is still here. The Ornette three-piece sax bass, drums, trio stuff is still here, but Dave McRae and Bernie Hahn definitely add to the sound. They're not on every track, but this is an amazingly great record, and I don't know why people aren't into them still. Their last record is called Activate. It was produced by Carl Palmer from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And different drummer. Instead of Tony Hicks, they've got Adrian Tilbrook. Fantastic drummer, by the way. This has sort of continues along from the Another Fine Mess sound. Much more Ronnie Asbury keyboards on this. He plays saxophone, but a lot of the tracks are keyboard oriented. The keyboards are great. Mellotron, Fender piano, organ, piano. This is a really cool record. Again, sort of more of a jazz rock leaning sound on the last two. So I mentioned Francis Monkman in 801. He was in a band called Curved Air. And I recently listened to their first album at a record store. Didn't like it so much, but it's a cool record. It's kind of a pop record. It's called Air Condition. I'm talking about it too much. Their second album is where they really hit their stride. And they were a really interesting band. It was a vocalist named Sonia Christina, beautiful voice. Francis Monkman on keyboards, Daryl Way on violin, and then a rotating cast of drummers and bassists. Anyway, on this album, they really stretched out. Really much more sort of jazzy prog, I would classify this record as. Really amazing. The difference night and day from the first record. The first record, which is totally respectable and good, it's one thing. This is a completely different thing, though. Something got into them. They said, let's really go for it. Anyway, Daryl Way is an amazing violinist. Francis Monkman, great keyboardist and conceptualist. Sonia Christina's beautiful voice, great bass, great drums. Really fine record. Some really long, stretchy instrumental tracks. The successor to that, the third album they did, Phantasmagoria, is possibly their masterpiece. It's one of my favorite progressive rock albums of all time. And just a lot of very imaginative moments on this. There's horns, there's strings, there's weird tape and synth experimentation. Lots of great soloing by Daryl Way and Francis Monkman. And they brought in some studio musicians, one of whom, Frank Riccati, is a vibes player, kind of Britain's answer to Gary Burton. He gets a couple of solos on this. The bass player on this is Mike Wedgwood, who later joined Caravan. John G. Perry also passed through the band at a later point. Anyway, this is a really fantastic record. Phantasmagoria by Curved Air. Witty lyrics, this is the whole package. Anyway, Daryl Way and Francis Monkman left after that record, and they recorded a record called Aircut that I've never heard with Eddie Jobson on violin and keyboards, and I think they got a guitarist. And the guitarist was really interesting because he was the guy that was in the fake Fleetwood Mac. It was a huge controversy back in the 70s, and Fleetwood Mac was supposed to tour and it fell through, and the manager hired his own musicians, one of whom was the guitar player from Curved Air named Kirby, and he later joined a band called Stretch that really was successful in England. Anyway, really interesting tie-in. Lots of personnel changes. Stuart Copeland also was later in Curved Air, but that's a different story. Those two records are the ones to get. Anyway, Daryl Way formed his own band called Daryl Way's Wolf. They did 3 records. First one, Saturation Point, great jazz rock record, some vocals on it. The bassist, Dec Messakar, was also later on in Caravan, I believe. Drummer Ian Mosley, later on in Marillion, had been in a group called Trace with the Rick Vanderlinden on keyboards. Daryl Way on violin, and the amazing virtuoso guitarist John Etheridge, who later joined Soft Machine. So, great record. They did 3. The second one's no less great. They did an instrumental side and a vocal side on this one. Same personnel, very stable personnel. These are great because very highly energetic jazz rock, and then vocal tunes that are really interesting, progressive rock kinds of things. They did a record, I take that back. In America, the first 2 records were compiled with a hideous cover. It's like a guy with a wolf head and a woman hugging him. I don't know. It appealed to me, however, because I bought it. That's how I found out about them. And I liked it so much, I got the originals. And believe me, get the originals, because some of the best stuff wasn't on that compilation. They did a third record called Night Music that's really good, with a vocalist. It's the guy from If. And highly recommend it. It's probably the cheapest of the three. Anyway, the record's over. It's time for me to shut up, so I will do that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this proggy, rocky version of Cheap Heat. You should be able to find most of those, even though they're imports. I'm an American, so imports means the rest of the world. Most of them are imports, not all of them. And good luck, happy hunting, and I'll see you next time.